और इस गीत के
Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran.
And I am Munmun Bhattacharya. You're watching a special coverage, Biden in the White House, as we count down to the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States.
Right, it's 9 p.m. in New Delhi or 10:30 in the morning in Washington, D.C. A very warm welcome to all our viewers in India and around the world.
If you are just tuning in, we are 1 hour into our special broadcast. Another hour remains, and over the past hour, we told you about all the events planned for the Biden administration's inauguration in the United States, the swearing-in ceremony and other related events. We also told you about Biden's priorities with expert comments and analysis from our guests who joined us from around the world. Former U.S. diplomat Nisha Biswal from Washington, D.C. was with us, and so was a former UN Environment Program Chief Erik Solheim from Norway.
And over the next 1 hour, we will talk further about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, their life and career, the rise of the Indian American community as well, and what one can expect from Biden White House over the next 4 years. But first, the headlines at this hour.
The United States gears up for Biden-Harris inauguration on Wednesday. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to take oath at a ceremony at West Front of U.S. Capitol on 20th January.
Biden will receive a traditional presidential escort from the 15th Street in Washington, D.C. to the White House. He will participate in a socially distanced pass-in review with members of the military on the Capitol's East Front. Attendance will be sharply curtailed due to the coronavirus pandemic.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden nominates 20 Indian Americans, including 13 women, to key positions in his administration days before his swearing-in.
Biden announces an ambitious goal of inoculating 100 million Americans with COVID-19 vaccine in the first 100 days of his administration. All schools from kindergarten to class 8 to reopen by the end of April.
And DD India gets you an extensive coverage of the U.S. swearing-in ceremony as it happens. Watch live reporters by our correspondents on the ground all through the event. Get news, views and analysis from our experts.
All right, let's begin our special broadcast. Right, so over the last 1 hour, we discussed about COVID-19, economic recovery and climate change. I want to take a moment to talk about Biden and the Indo-Pacific. How does he intend to deal with China? These questions have engaged the attention of scholars worldwide. Now, I spoke to Nicola Smith, Asia correspondent of the Telegraph newspaper published from the UK, and I began by asking about Biden's China policy. Will Biden be as tough on China as Trump? And how will Biden's policy be different from Trump's? This is what she had to say.
I think it will be less confrontational than President Trump's strategy toward China. Although I don't think that President Biden is going to be soft per se on China. I think you can be tough, you can stand up to Beijing without being as confrontational or lashing out on different issues. And I don't think we're going to see a return to the Obama era, where there were criticisms that President Obama had been too soft on China, particularly on issues like the South China Sea, that he had not taken enough action to counter the spread of China's territorial claims there. And the past 4 years, in many ways, have been a wake-up call on China's foreign policies and its drive to expand. I think that many in Southeast Asia have appreciated Trump's willingness to call China out, and also the recognition by the Trump administration of the nature of the challenge with China. And I don't see President Biden and his administration pulling back from that. Again, the style will be different, but I don't think that they are going to necessarily be soft on China, because so much has changed in the past 4 years. You've seen aggressive foreign policy from Beijing, particularly towards India, towards the border confrontation, threats against trade partners like Australia. You've seen the crackdown on Hong Kong, and also threats against Taiwan. We've had so many incursions by the People's Liberation Army, or the Air Force, over the past few months, that it's going to be very hard for President Biden to not take a tougher stance towards China than he did when he was vice president.
Indeed. Just a quick follow-up question there, Nicola. You spoke about how Biden will not be soft on China, yet he could be less confrontational. Now, is that because that's his style? Is that his temperament? Or do you think domestic issues will leave him with very little time to focus on the foreign policy challenges obtaining in this part of the world?
I think it's going to be both, actually. I mean, he does have a very different style. He's much more of a traditional politician. He's a lifelong politician, whereas President Trump's whole brand was being an outsider and a very transactional businessman, which led to a more confrontational approach. So there is that. I don't think that President Biden does want to immediately get into conflicts with anyone on foreign policy. And obviously this year is his first challenge, and it's a huge one, is to deal with the pandemic and the fallout of the pandemic on the American economy, on health. America suffered a huge toll during the pandemic, and really people will be looking towards him to get the country back on track. And I don't think that he's going to necessarily neglect foreign policy, but he will have, his priority will be from day one to sort out America's huge problems just now. And he does have a good team to deal with foreign policy, and I'm sure he'll be relying a lot on them in the coming months.
Indeed. And looking at the Indo-Pacific from India's perspective for a moment, there are 4 countries that have come together in the Indo-Pacific region. That's India, the US, Japan, and Australia. And they are part of what is known as the quadrilateral, or the Quad. Now, what kind of a future do you anticipate for the Quad under President Biden?
I think that there will be, again, more collaboration with America, and perhaps an expectation on the countries of the Quad to take more of a role in the Indo-Pacific. They're all closer and based in the region. So I think there will be an expectation from Washington that India takes more of a role, and also Australia and Japan, in terms of countering China's influence in the region, and also the authoritarian ideology that China brings to the table. So I mean, it's definitely significant that the Quad has started to revive its activities after a hiatus, and I think that's a reflection of the nature of the challenge that China is posing currently regionally. And I do see more collaboration coming up on the military and diplomatic front over the next few months. I think one of the challenges for the Quad and for other regional allies is to bring some kind of alternative in terms of economic diplomacy, especially as the region recovers from the pandemic, and even countries in Asia who have not suffered terribly on the health front have still taken a real blow economically. And if you're looking at the Pacific Islands and Pacific nations who have been quite sheltered from COVID-19, they are going to struggle. And there's going to be economically, and there's going to be a battle for influence that will take place in the economic sphere as well as the military and diplomatic sphere. So that is a role that the Quad should be looking at. It's difficult to know really how the Quad is going to handle that, because there are strategic differences between the countries, but it's certainly something they should be talking about.
Indeed. Now, you live and work in Taiwan. Now, how would issues such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, or even Xinjiang, how will they fare going forward, especially under a Biden in the White House?
It is going to be one of Biden's biggest foreign policy challenges, how he handles these human rights issues and China. We've already seen an early indication on Hong Kong when there were mass arrests last week of pro-democracy activists and politicians, and Antony Blinken, who is his nominee for Secretary of State, made quite a strong statement on Twitter and saying that America would stand by the people of Hong Kong and against China's attempts to crack down on democracy. So I think that's an early signal that Biden isn't going to turn the other way when it comes to human rights abuses that are perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. On Xinjiang, there's more and more evidence coming to light of alleged atrocities taking place there. And that again is going to be a challenge to Biden as to how he handles that and maintains a cooperative relationship with China. When it comes to Taiwan, the stakes are very high, not only for Taiwan, but also for America and for China. Taiwan is very strategic. It's in a very strategic location. It's part of the first island chain. China currently doesn't have a Pacific coastline. If it ends up taking over Taiwan, then it would have a Pacific coastline, which would have huge implications for the US. And also Taiwan's position in terms of strategic waterways and trade routes, and just its status as a democracy in a region that is quite turbulent, and it really does have a kind of special link with the US in that sense. I don't see Biden pulling back from defending Taiwan or supporting Taiwan. I think he does have to clarify his strategy very quickly, especially as the outgoing Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has just changed the terms of how US and Taiwanese officials interact with each other, lifting previous restrictions. So that puts the Biden administration in the position where they have to set out very quickly how they will interpret those changes, which are very sensitive in Beijing.
And finally, Nicola, you report on Chinese affairs as well for your newspaper. Now, if I were to ask you, how would Beijing be looking at the Biden presidency, and how do you look at the Xi Jinping-Biden dynamic going forward?
It's very hard to put your mind into the minds of another government, especially a communist government. I would imagine that they would see an opportunity with Biden to reset relations. I would imagine they would expect him to be a bit softer and less transactional than President Trump. I mean, I think Beijing is just going to be like the rest of the world, watching very carefully in the first few months for signs of how hawkish or how dovish the Biden administration will be towards China. And there's a lot of unanswered questions, not only in Beijing but also in Taiwan as well, who are watching. They're watching very closely also.
Right, on that note, Nicholas Smith and Zaiwan, thank you so much for joining us on DD India. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right, so we'll be joining by a team of experts on this special broadcast. I'll also be joined by my colleague Kate Fisher from Washington, D.C. Ambassador Arun Singh is also joining us on the special broadcast, and also joining us from the U.S. is senior journalist Seema Sirohi. Welcome to all our guests. If I can come to you, Kate, first. Now, we discussed about COVID-19, economic recovery and climate change. Racial equity is the fourth priority for the Biden administration. How do you think he will navigate this contentious issue going forward?
Well, he's already begun to navigate it. You can see by the people he has chosen to staff his administration with. If you look firstly at his vice president, she is the first woman vice president, but also the first African American and South Asian American to hold such high office in the United States. And he didn't stop there. He has employed, I've just seen that now it's up to 20 Indian Americans throughout his administration. They include the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and Neera Tanden, who will run the Office of Management and Budget. So he is beginning to try to show that his leadership will be inclusive and try to engender that, foster that throughout the rest of the nation by choosing to have an administration that reflects the kind of cultural mix of the United States as it is at the moment. So he has made it clear that equity is really important to him and his the way he wants to govern this country. And you know, he has promised as well to do things like police reform, increase education. So I think it's a very different approach from the one that Donald Trump took.
Absolutely. Seema Sirohi, I'll come to you now. 20 Indian Americans are being drafted into the Biden administration, 17 of them in key posts in the White House, 13 of them women. Never before has such a number been drafted into any US administration before. What's behind this change?
Well, I think the foremost reason is that the Indian American community has really come into its own. There were many Indian Americans in the campaign for various Democratic candidates, and so now it's only natural that they should get positions in the administration. Many of them are experts in this area. In the areas they've been nominated to, people who come to mind, besides Dr. Vivek Murthy, you have Mr. Chabra, who's going to look after Consumer Protection Board. He's one of the most, one of the strongest people fighting for consumer protection. Then you have in the NSC a person who has basically tracked China as an academic. His name is Rush Doshi.
Yes.
He is one of the most respected young voices on China. So I think it's a natural progression. As you know, the Indian American community is one of the most sort of highly educated, the wealthiest immigrant groups, and they have taken a great interest in politics in America, especially with the second generation Indian Americans, and they have risen to the top.
Absolutely. Ambassador Singh, how do you think the India-US ties will evolve under a Biden in the White House, number one? And number two, now we have many familiar faces in the incoming administration. We have Tony Blinken as the Secretary of State. We have Wendy Sherman as the top diplomat in the State Department. We have William Burns, who is heading the CIA. We have Kurt Campbell, who is the Asia czar, so to speak, or the Indo-Pacific czar in the administration. So would that be like a dream team for countries such as India in the region?
First of all, looking at President-elect Biden's own involvement on issues related to India, he's been very supportive of India for a long time. And way back in 2001, as chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he had written to then President George Bush asking for sanctions against India to be removed. And in an interview in 2006, he had said that his dream was that the India-US relations by 2020 should be the best relationship in the world. He had visited India also as Vice President. And it was in the Obama-Biden administration that President Obama had articulated support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. The administration had declared India a major defense partner, and the administration had worked for India to become a member of important international export control regimes. Beyond that, as you mentioned, a large number of people who were there, senior people in the Obama-Biden administration, have now been nominated to join the team for the Biden-Harris administration. And I had occasion to interact with many of them because, as it turned out, for 6 out of 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration, I had been assigned in Washington on behalf of the government of India in various capacities. And in my interaction with them, I could see clearly that they saw the relationship with India in a very positive perspective. They saw the relationship with India from a strategic lens, and they worked to advance the relationship. It was in that administration that a senior member had said that the US sees the rise of India to be in US interest, and that the US sees India as a net security provider in the region. So given all that, and given the kind of people who have now been identified in this administration, I'm confident that the bilateral relationship will certainly advance in a very, very positive trajectory. But beyond that, in terms of the challenges that the region faces, and you spoke about the challenges in the Indo-Pacific, the challenges that everyone faces, not just in this region, but globally, from the rise of China, from the economic, technological, military rise of China, and China's efforts at imposing its authoritarian system, its authoritarian model, its predatory economic practices. So in terms of dealing with that challenge, I think even if the Biden administration is, in terms of rhetoric, not perhaps as sharp as the Trump administration, in terms of substance, it will be a very similar policy.
Fair enough. Kate, coming back to you now, what's your sense about how tough or soft would the incoming Biden administration be on China? Because we've seen belligerent attacks from Mike Pompeo, who was extremely vocal in the Trump administration against China, be it on China's expansionist ambitions, or on Taiwan, or on Hong Kong, or in the South China Sea. Is that expected to continue?
I think certainly the Biden administration is primed to be tougher on China than perhaps we would have thought if we hadn't had Donald Trump's presidency beforehand. When he worked in the Obama administration was nowhere near as tough as Donald Trump has been, with tariffs, etc., and the trade war. But there is quite a lot of bipartisan support for Donald Trump's tough stance on China. Many Democrats agree that they need to be tougher when it comes to trade and security and so on. So I think we may well see that Joe Biden does continue to be somewhat tough when it comes to dealing with them, and he is going to try, though the difference in his approach will be that he is going to try to get a coalition, the rest of the world to join America in trying to stand up to the rise of China. He's going to try to get allies in Europe and so on to join together. Of course, that's going to be a lot harder for him, given the fact that during the Trump administration, many of those old alliances came a little bit frayed because he didn't really, he preferred a more isolationist approach, America first and so on. And so there may be some of those allies in Europe that are less keen to join Joe Biden in whatever his plan is for dealing with China.
Absolutely. In fact, there are some who say that Trump was tougher on allies than on opponents. Well, the jury is out on that one. But Kate, thank you so much for that. I'll request Seema Surohi as well as Ambassador Singh to continue to be with us. But let's now take a moment, Ramesh, to talk to you about Biden and Harris's path to the White House. My colleague Abhishek Mahajan is with us, and he will walk you through the political careers of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And that's going to be very interesting. Watch this out.
Right, thank you again, Munmun and Ramesh, and we'll talk about the man of the hour, like you said, Joe Biden, and then touch upon the political career of Kamala Harris too. Basically, the journeys of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So, man of the hour, like we are saying, Joe Biden, he was born on November 20th, 1942 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, United States, and the Biden family are of English, French and Irish descent. So, Joe Biden's family moved to the Wilmington, Delaware area when he was 10, and then Biden received a bachelor's degree from the University of Delaware in 1965. So, law degree from Syracuse University in New York in 1968. He finished his law degree in 1968, and as a law graduate, Biden left New York and worked as an attorney in Delaware. So, he also served as the Newcastle County Council from 1970 to 1972, and he was elected to US Senate in 1972 at the age of 29, and he was also the 5th youngest senator in history. And again, later Biden launched his first presidential bid in June 1987, but he dropped out 3 months later following a plagiarism scandal, and later in 1988 he suffered a health crisis also and had to undergo brain surgery also. But again in 2008, almost 20 years later, he made another bid to the White House, and we can actually count it as his comeback. And then Barack Obama beat him to the Democratic nomination, as Biden could secure only 1% of delegates in the Iowa Democratic caucuses, and then Barack Obama picked him as his running mate after winning the Democratic nomination. His partnership with Obama started then. And then in 2008 presidential elections, Obama and Biden defeated their Republican opponents, John McCain and Sarah Palin. And in 2012, they defeated Republican challenger Mitt Romney and his running mate Paul Ryan. And on April 25th, 2019, Biden, we all know, announced his candidacy in 2020 Democratic presidential primaries, and he picked California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate, Woman of the Hour. And now, talking about Kamala Harris now, the first female Vice President of America and first Asian American, and 48 previously were all men. We're talking about the Vice Presidents here of the United States. And then she attended Howard University and University of California's Hastings College of the Law. And then Kamala Harris embarked on a rise through the California legal system, emerging as State Attorney General in the year 2010. And following November 2016 elections, Harris became second African American woman and the first South Asia American to win a seat in the US Senate, and we can say her political career started from here, and she declared her candidacy for 2020 US presidential election but dropped out of the race later, we all know. And in August 2020, Joe Biden announced Kamala Harris as a vice presidential running mate. And Ramesh and Munmun, before we leave from here, let me repeat the words said by Joe Biden's father, Champ, the measure of a man is not how often he is knocked down, but how quickly he gets up. Back to you, Ramesh and Munmun.
Right, Abhishek, thank you so much for bringing our viewers up to speed with the path to the White House of the two people in question, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, if I can go back to our guests on this special broadcast, we still have with us Seema Sirohi and Ambassador Arun Singh. Seema, you're joining us from the US, so I want to ask you a question which I asked Professor W.P.S. Sidhu as well in the last hour, previous hour of our broadcast, and that has to do with whether Biden will be preoccupied with domestic issues, and that would leave him with little time to focus his energies, time and effort on tackling foreign policy challenges such as China and the Indo-Pacific. Your thoughts?
It is true that the predominant issues would be domestic, tackling the pandemic, rolling out of the vaccine, which has been very chaotic thus far. So that, of course, goes without saying that will be his most important concern. But, as they say in America, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. he'll have to do that. And I think what gives me confidence that things will go on fine is the team that he has appointed is extremely strong.
Right.
So what I'm guessing will happen is that he'll set the broad contours of the foreign policy that he wants, which I'm sure they've already discussed by now. And then you have Tony Blinken as Secretary of State. He knows the world, he knows the State Department really well. You have Jake Sullivan, whom Biden called as one of the smartest people of his generation. You have Kurt Campbell as the Indo-Pacific coordinator. So these are very, senior and well-informed people. So on that front, I wouldn't worry too much.
Okay.
The question is, getting these people who require Senate confirmation quickly through the process. That to me is going to be one question I'd be looking for an answer, because of the impending impeachment trial that the Senate has to undertake when it comes back to business. Ramesh.
Absolutely. And Ambassador Singh, we earlier looked at the life journeys and political journeys, particularly of both Joe Biden as well as Kamala Harris. We've seen that Biden has made many shots at the presidency in the past. On several occasions, he had to withdraw because of family tragedies. He's had a lot of trysts with personal tragedies. And now here he is at the age of 78, the oldest US president-elect, set to now take oath in less than 40 hours from now. What is your impression of Joe Biden as president? Do you think that he can emerge as the healer-in-chief in the United States at a time when the country is extremely polarized?
As you mentioned, the US is extremely polarized. You saw that in terms of the events that happened on January 6th, in terms of storming of the Capitol. Even now, a large number of people in the US believe what Donald Trump told them, that the elections were rigged, that their votes were not counted fairly. So that is the level of misinformation or disinformation that persists in the US. Now, Joe Biden, whether or not he's the healer-in-chief, he will have to try and generate some bipartisan consensus.
Yes. So, Ambassador,
I'm afraid we've lost that link with Ambassador Singh, but we'll try to fix that link with him momentarily. But if I can continue with our other guest, Seema Sirohi, who is with us on the special broadcast. Seema, let's take a step back and look at the issues confronting the US in terms of countries or regions which might be of particular interest to India. Regions and issues in terms of terrorism, in terms of Afghanistan, in terms of West Asia, particularly the Gulf country, in the Gulf, Iran, because India has interest in its extended neighborhood, and the Biden policies might impinge or impact them going forward. Your thoughts on how Biden might tackle some of these issues going forward?
See, as far as the rise of China is concerned, there is bipartisan consensus on the issue.
Right.
And the people he has appointed all have very strong views on how to do it. They may not employ the same sort of tactics as Donald Trump did, but the fact that the details of the Indo-Pacific policy have been made public in the last few days of the Trump administration kind of puts Biden on the spot, in a manner of speaking. He now it's in public, everybody knows what other countries are expecting, and so they have no choice but to continue to some extent.
Okay.
But this is not to take away from their own sense of how they want to compete with China. Kurt Campbell, Rush Doshi, Jake Sullivan, Eli Ratner, who's supposed to take the topmost position for Asia in the Defense Department, have all written several pieces over the last 2-3 years. And I think with a mind to indicate to the public and to China in general that this is what we think. So I think that was quite deliberate, because many of these people were, the Obama administration. Some of them were very sort of disappointed and frustrated because in the second term of the Obama administration, they kind of lost the ball on how to deal with China. And China kept on consolidating. Kurt Campbell is the architect of the pivot to Asia, which, as you might remember, became known as the rebalance to Asia because the Chinese objected to the word pivot. And the Obama administration agreed to sort of scale back. So I think they have a little bit to prove themselves. So we would, I think we shouldn't worry too much about it.
All right.
As far as the Middle East is concerned, that's where the big question is, whether Biden would automatically go back to, renegotiating JCPOA, the deal with Iran, that is, or whether he would want to improve upon it. The consensus now in Washington is that the deal was kind of soft on Iran. So there might be an attempt to make it, in terms of the demands on Iran, a little bit stronger. The next one is like, how would they deal with Saudi Arabia? There is a huge constituency in the Democratic Party to distance America from Saudi Arabia, because under Trump, the US came very close to Saudi Arabia, did not punish the regime for the murder of journalist Khashoggi. So all those things are,
right.
We have to wait and see.
Absolutely. I'll ask both our guests to stay on, but I want to take a moment to talk a bit more about Biden. Now, he is the man of the hour. Now, did you, viewer, for instance, know that Biden is famously known as Amtrak Joe? Here's why. Because Biden loves train travel. He traveled by train as a lawmaker for 36 years. It's a 90-minute ride from his home at Wilmington in the U.S. state of Delaware to Washington, D.C. And that earned him the nickname Amtrak Joe. Now, Amtrak is a U.S. government-funded railway service. Now, Biden launched his 1988 campaign from his hometown train station. Now, Wilmington Station was renamed after Biden in 2011. He left by train on his last day as vice president as well.
And I'm sure you would know that Dr. Jill Biden, the new US First Lady as well, and she is a teacher by profession. She teaches English. Jill Biden would retain her career. She would be the first US First Lady to do so. Her students call her Dr. B. She'll be the first US First Lady to retain her day job. Students call her Dr. B. And she has 2 master's degrees as well. She's Dr. B because she earned her doctorate in 2007.
And good news for dog lovers. The White House will soon have pets. Champ, a German Shepherd, is 12 years old. The second dog is named Major. Now, Major is a German Shepherd too. Major is 2 years old and it was adopted from a shelter home. And that makes it the first adopted dog to be in the White House. White House in which the Bidens will step in on the 20th of January. Now, Biden used to have 2 more dogs. They were named Senator and Governor.
If you wondered whether Biden has a nickname, well, he was called Champ in his childhood.
Now, a word about the Biden family Bible, which he will use for the oath. He will use the family heirloom for the oath. The Bible dates back to 1893. It's about 13 centimeters thick. It has a Celtic cross on its cover. And Biden's ancestors, by the way, were from Ireland. And what's more, he used the same Bible every time. In fact, he used it 7 times as a lawmaker. Remember, he was a senator in the US for over 3 decades and twice as vice president. In fact, his late son Bo used the very same Bible too. And viewers who might not be familiar with him and his family, Biden's son Bo was an attorney general. Right, so he used the Bible twice as vice president, and I mentioned before, his late son Bo used it too. Now, here's another interesting statistic. Now, Biden ran unsuccessfully for presidency in 1988 and 2008, but he succeeded the third time in 2020, that's last year.
Biden has several other records to his name. He is the 15th former vice president to become president and the second after Richard Nixon to become president in non-consecutive terms.
Also, if you didn't know it already, Biden will be the second Catholic US president after John Kennedy.
Only 2 presidents have been born during the World War II. He is the oldest president at 78. And he is the only president born during World War II, I understand. Well, Ramesh?
Right, now by now you know a fair bit about Biden, the man and his personality. Now, did you also know that Biden overcame a handicap as a child? Now, Biden had a stutter, which he overcame, and it inspired an American teen to deal with it. Take a look.
Talking to you today. About a few months ago, I met him in New Hampshire. He told me that we were members of the same club. We stutter. It was really amazing to hear that someone like me became vice president. He told me about a book of poems by Yeats he would read out loud to practice. He showed me how he marks his addresses to make them easier to say out loud. So I did the same thing today. And now I'm here talking to you today about the future, about our future. My family often says when the world feels better before talking about something normal, like going to the movies. We all want the world to feel better. We need the world to feel better. I'm just a regular kid, and in a short amount of time, Joe Biden made me more confident about something that's bothered me my whole life. Joe Biden cared. Imagine what he could do for all of us. Kids like me are counting on you to elect someone we can all look up to. Someone who cares. Someone who will make our country and the world feel better. We're counting on you.
And now, yes.
Right, so we still have with us our guests, Seema Sirohi and Ambassador Singh, but if I can go one last time on this broadcast to my colleague Kate Fisher, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Kate, in hindsight, how would you, what can you tell our viewers about Biden, the man, and his personality, and what he might bring to the White House, which might be different from the previous occupants of the White House?
Absolutely, and I think when Joe Biden first announced his run for the presidency, there were a lot of people, even with the Democratic Party, who felt that he was not the right person. He was older, a bit slower perhaps. He didn't have the get up and go that perhaps they felt that they needed to try to beat Donald Trump. But as the months have gone by, I think more and more people are beginning to think that perhaps it is just that kind of personality, someone who takes things a bit slower, someone who's empathetic, someone who has spent many, many years in government and understands how it all works, is perhaps just the kind of person that they need at this time to just the kind of person they need at this time to get the jobs that are needed done. He needs to really knuckle down and get this vaccine sorted out. He needs to try to unite people, and the empathy that he has, particularly because he's had such tragedy in his own life, is one way that perhaps he will try to heal the wounds that exist in this country. I think most people think that's a pretty tall order at the moment, but you know, he's a man who lost his wife and young daughter in a car accident when he was a young man, and then he lost his son Beau Biden to brain cancer a few years ago. So that kind of level of empathy and the way he looks at life, that, you know, it can be a struggle, but there are ways around it. There is hope that that kind of attitude to government is exactly what the United States needs at the moment, rather than someone who would perhaps stir things up even more. But I don't think there's anyone in Washington that doesn't think that is a huge, huge task, because there are just so many people who believe the false allegations about electoral fraud that Donald Trump made.
Yes, Kate, two quick questions. Earlier, we understand that there was a rehearsal that was to take place of the inauguration function on Sunday, and that was postponed. Now there are reports suggesting that people who were attending a rehearsal for the inauguration day ceremonies were reportedly evacuated from the building as a security threat was announced. Can you confirm that for us? And second, did Biden say that he would be coming in for his inauguration event in the Amtrak train that he, during his senator days, would take on a daily basis as a round trip from Delaware to DC? But is that not happening, considering the security concerns?
Yeah, that's right. He had wanted to arrive in Washington on his favourite train, as he had done for so many years as a senator. He prided himself on getting home after a day's work in Washington to see his children after the loss of his wife. And he wanted to be there for family time, and he wanted to do that again to come to his inauguration. But unfortunately, the security services have said it is just too risky for him to be on a 90-minute train journey in this, given what's going on in Washington at the moment. So he will not be doing that. He will be attending the inauguration under as much security as possible.
Right, on that note, Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C.
The incident at the Capitol, we believe it was a fire and it is being dealt with. We don't believe that anyone is in danger at the moment, but I don't have the latest.
All right, on that note, Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C., thank you once again for joining on a special broadcast. And thanks also to our other two guests, Ambassador Arun Singh and Seema Sirohi, for making time to be with us on this special broadcast. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Right, and since we are discussing about India, the US and the Indian-American community, now I thought now would be a good time to bring in another guest, Michelin star chef Vikas Khanna. Now he's an Indian living in the US for the last 2 decades. He's a man of many parts, celebrity chef, author, philanthropist and filmmaker. He made his foray into filmmaking with The Last Color, which was released in 2019. And I began by asking him about what he made of the rise and rise of the Indian-American community. Take a listen.
There's been a big shift in the last few years. Now, you know, after they say that after Jews, it's always Indians who are more successful financially, stability-wise, education-wise, which is amazing, you know, because when we go to big universities, Ivy League colleges, most of the top professors and the deans are now Indians, you know, and they're not Indian Americans, they are from Indian origin, which is amazing. Because, you know, how many barriers and how many mountains do you need to cross to be on that level of the top, to beat everyone else? So I think it's a moment of pride for us. And it's also, yesterday I was reading an amazing report which said that, you know, the crime rate of convicted Indians is one of the minimum in the United States of America, which also says that, you know, they're contributing so much more to the culture and the financial growth of this country and global economies.
Indeed. And talking about the Indian Americans, how do you see the rise, the elevation of Kamala Harris, who has made history by becoming the first woman, the first person of color, and the first Indian American at that to become the Vice President of the United States?
I think it's amazing. It's just brilliant. Brilliant. It's a big shift happening globally. It's very important. It's when the cultures come together, that's when you form the most powerful culture. And we always have been talking about as America, the land of opportunities and melting pot. I think this is the first time we're going to see somebody on such a high position in the office, which is very important to all of us because it's actually an inspiration for people who are watching this right now, the big shift which is happening.
And as a successful Indian business person and professional living and working in the US, how did you view the recently concluded election in the US? It was a bitterly contested election and has left the US divided like never before. How has the US changed since you first landed in the US? For the better or worse?
For the better, definitely, because when I landed in America in 2000, and just after a few months, 9/11 happened. So I saw a big shift happening in America for people of color. It was very difficult. To one point, when one day in Tribeca, I was actually asked to leave a restaurant because they said that the girls behind me are feeling uncomfortable around me. And I'm seeing this whole thing. I did not know how to fight for myself, for the fight for my entire community. But now I don't care. I just stand up. I'm like, no, you can't be judged based on your accent or your English. And when somebody makes fun of me now, initially I used to be so embarrassed I wouldn't speak. But now I say, guys, I speak 6 languages. When you'll come to my level, then you'll understand that why my words are fumbled. And why I speak differently. And tell me the second language you speak, and most of the Americans don't speak a second language. So I think it is very important for me to constantly, sorry, this is my work time. It's an amazing thing that, we are seeing this empowerment of people of color. And that's what the greatest asset of America has always been.
And Mr. Biden has listed racial equity as among, one of his 4 priorities.
Yeah.
As an Indian living in the US, as a person of color, do you think racism exists and thrives in the US today as we speak? And how has a Trump in the White House damaged the fabric of the US society?
So I'll tell you a very funny incident. Just a few months back in March, I think, I was invited at the Rashtrapati Bhavan to greet President Trump and his family. And I was with Mr. Rahman. And they said, we are out inviting 2 artists. It was me and Mr. A.R. Rahman. And when I met Mr. Trump, I had met him before he was a president in New York a few times because I was hosting galas a lot. And I told him, Mr. President, it's very surprising that in the last 4 years, we did not have a single Indian meal at the White House. And in the previous administration, we were always doing something Indian all the time. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, you got to speak to this person. And he just pushes the parcel to someone else. And I'm just looking at him and I'm like, we talk so much about America. And when we talk about cultures, cuisine is a very integral part of it. And I think that has been one of the biggest asset for all of us, that I was given an opportunity in the last administration, President Barack Obama's, where the encouragement I received during those 8 years was phenomenal. And that helps to elevate the entire community when they see their food being appreciated from the White House to big galas and events. And I think that was important to me. That was something which was very important to my career and Indian cuisine. And we multiplied the effect of Indian food during those 8 years. For a person of color to receive a Michelin star is equivalent to 2 Michelin stars, what a white person gets 1. Because in the last 21 years living in America, I have realized that most of the people of color are set up for failure. When they break the code, we have to celebrate, because their breaking the code is so difficult. How much of persistence, resilience must be in my heart to constantly keep going. And I think that's very important to me. And of course, racism exists everywhere in the world, everywhere. Mm-hmm. You're judged the moment you walk into the room because how you look, where you come from, your heritage, your accent, the way you look, everything is judged. But I eventually say that my work should be judged in a few years, the body of work which I'll create, not because of the way I spoke and the way I looked.
Absolutely. And you spoke about President Trump and President Obama. Have you met President-elect Biden in the past? And what are your impressions about Biden and your expectations from the Biden presidency over the next 4 years?
So I met him. I met President. That time he was Vice President elect when I met him first, and because I know President Barack Obama from Chicago, as he was senator, and I was invited to his house once in Washington D.C., and that was for Diwali, and it was really something special. The way he spoke about that, he trusts Indian doctors more. That was the first thing. And he says, it's an unfortunate thing that, when we were doing the re-election campaigns for President Barack Obama in 2012, and that is the time when Vice President Biden was not traveling with him in New York. So I was hosting events in New York. And he said, I've always missed eating your food. And I said, you're not going anywhere, and so am I, and there'll be more opportunities. And I presented him with my book, Utsav, which he has in his house. So I think I love his persona, his calmness, stability, which is very important for us because America is one of the most important stages on the world. And if America becomes unstable, the artists and the art and the financial, everything gets disturbed around the world.
Indeed. You spoke about your effort in the 2012 re-election campaign of President Obama. In 2020, were you as involved in the election campaign of Biden and Harris?
No comments, but I was. I was. There were days when we were making phone calls throughout the days. And because we also understand that their administration also brings a lot of opportunities, it also helps to create a more versatile America. It's more versatile. And of course, I have been very open and vocal about prejudice. And I also, because I don't speak about prejudice as a victim, I speak about that you need to overcome that. You need to cross that 3 inches of wall. It's a small wall, but it creates a much bigger, it's like a small pebble in your stone, the little pebble in your shoe, which actually stops you from climbing the mountain. It's not the mountain which is the barrier. It's a small pebble in your shoe. So we need to take a break and remove that pebble. And that's the thought process that we need to continue to move on.
Indeed. Beautifully well said there. Now, besides racial equity, President-elect Biden has cited COVID-19 pandemic and economic recovery as his other priorities. Now, how has the pandemic affected you personally or professionally in the last several months?
It was a very dark space. I had a huge lease to sign on 1st of April, or 31st of March. And my landlords called me and said, there's a huge article in New York Times today saying that there's going to be a huge pandemic. And they were predicting that this is going to be a massive thing. And nobody was believing each other at that time. We said, oh, what's a big deal? It's a small virus, right? Our initial reactions were so like, we did not know the magnitude of this pandemic. All gone. I have a massive catering company. And what happens in my catering company is that we host exclusive galas. And summer is the time when we make most money. Because a lot of American weddings and Hamptons and New York and museums and artwork. So those galas are a big part of us. And second, after that summer, we make maximum money during holidays. Right. Everything gone. And we also had to return so many advances, which we had taken from people. And we had actually used them for my infrastructure of my company. Everything was gone. Everything was gone. But during this time to create more employment, I actually signed 4 books. Because every time I sign a book, many people get jobs. And after that, we also released and we launched a new restaurant in Dubai, Elora, also because it creates employment and also changes the mood for us that, at this time also you are working so that, and I understand, but also I started Feed India during this time. So I had to put everything else on the back burner because of my mom's request. She's saying, I want you to stand in the middle of this in the country and feed my country to best of your ability. And so I had to, many things were done voluntarily for me because even now I was doing okay during the pandemic. Because I also have extreme diversified company profile because my portfolio is massive in the way of movies, documentaries, books, restaurants, caterings, events. So television, intelligent, my equities in intellectual properties. So that was helping me survive. But at that time, I put everything on the back burner to run Feed India.
Great. Mr. Vikas Khanna, thank you so much for making time for us at DD India. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's a wrap, but news continues here on DD India.
And Ramesh, I must say it was an appetite-stirring conversation on a lighter note, but a very, very realistic one on a more serious note.
Indeed.
So that's it then in today's coverage, but we'll resume our special coverage at 7 p.m. IST tomorrow, and that is 13:30 GMT on Tuesday, the 19th of January. Thanks for watching.
Until then, bye-bye.